Between 1963 and 1984, in the city of Elmira, New York, a writer named Jane Roberts entered a trance state twice a week to dictate complex philosophical and scientific material. The raw data from this 21-year period is immense. It comprises 10 published books, alongside a continuously dictated 6,000-page verbatim transcript. The phenomenon initially emerged in December 1963, when Roberts and her husband received early communications via a Ouija board before transitioning entirely to direct vocal dictation. The voice dictating this material claimed the name Seth. It explicitly rejected the idea that it was a fragment of Roberts' own subconscious, instead defining itself as an independent energy personality essence existing outside physical reality. Observers recorded consistent physiological changes during these sessions. Roberts exhibited a darkened eye color, a pronounced tautness in facial muscles, a deepening of her voice, and complete amnesia regarding the hours she spent in the trance state. Because of the meticulous real-time transcription by her husband, this clinical dataset constitutes one of the most cohesive and continuously recorded instances of trance possession in modern history. Today, testing the exact nature of this phenomenon presents a severe experimental roadblock. Jane Roberts died in 1984, and her transcriber has also passed, permanently eliminating the possibility of live, triple-blind laboratory controls. The physical evidence, the original verbatim transcripts of all Seth sessions, is currently preserved for academic scrutiny at Yale University's Sterling Memorial Archives. Researchers attempting to study this archive face what is known as Myers' problem. This is the psychological paradigm highlighting the extreme mathematical difficulty of distinguishing information generated by a subject's own subconscious from a pure, external communication. To bypass this roadblock, investigators apply a documentary approach. Similar to how historians determine text attribution or detect literary fraud, researchers analyze the structural style and informational content of the dictated text itself. This matrix separates the 8 specific psychological, pathological, and anomalous hypotheses into 3 broad categories: mundane, subconscious, and superconscious causation. Without a living subject to place in a laboratory, structural and informational content analysis is the only scientifically viable mechanism remaining to deduce the actual origin of this material. The investigation begins with the first category, mundane causation. To test the hypothesis of conscious fraud, we cross-referenced the duration of the experiment with the text's internal consistency. Over 21 years, the dictated material maintained exact structural coherence without backtracking, revision, or contradiction. Furthermore, Roberts subjected the trance state to intense public scrutiny. The sessions were observed by independent psychologists and physicists, and she frequently entered the state on live television broadcasts, executing complex dictation under high-pressure conditions. If conscious deception is ruled out, the next mundane hypothesis is cryptomnesia, or source amnesia. This occurs when a person subconsciously regurgitates factual reading material they have consciously forgotten. To generate the Seth material via source amnesia, Roberts would have needed an extraordinarily rich, prolonged exposure to advanced physics, philosophy, and biology textbooks. Her educational background and environment lack any evidence of this vast, specialized reading history. The sheer volume, the multidisciplinary depth, and the public nature render both fraud and cryptomnesia statistically improbable explanations. Confronting the subconscious pathology assumption, we map dissociative identity disorder criteria against Roberts' presentation. DID requires stress-precipitated emergence during trauma. Roberts' scheduled sessions lacked preceding emotional shock. While DID exhibits emotional instability, Seth demonstrated philosophical coherence, unbroken continuous memory, and a sound moral framework. Another pathological model is hypnotic self-suggestion, proposing Roberts accidentally manufactured the personality through intense self-hypnosis. Roberts explicitly documented her own study of self-hypnosis and noted it was never used to initiate the sessions. The sustained structural complexity, rational deduction, and original problem-solving found in the output far exceed the known cognitive limits of typical hypnotic artifact generation. Standard clinical pathological models fail to explain the operational mechanics of this case because the output reflects high-level organization rather than disintegration. This forces the analysis into the final frontier tier of the matrix, superconscious and anomalous causation. The first hypothesis here is high creativity, sometimes called the hypertrophy of genius. This model suggests the output is not a pathology, but a sustained, radical uprush of subliminal inspiration, an extreme capability to harness the deep unconscious. Evidence for this includes instances where Roberts seemingly bypassed the Seth entity entirely. She produced what she called library material, where she claimed to tune directly into the historical worldview of specific figures, like the American philosopher William James. Researchers also evaluated empirical parapsychological, or psi, data. Between 1965 and 1967, Roberts underwent 84 telepathy envelope tests and 76 formal clairvoyance tests while in the trance state. While independent observers noted direct hits that strongly suggested anomalous information reception, the tests lacked the stringent conditions required for mathematical unquantifiability, leaving the results provocative but inconclusive. Roberts constructed her own theoretical framework to explain the phenomenon, called aspect psychology. Central to this is the concept of a basic source aspect. In this model, a basic source aspect is a deep structure archetype that guides the primary personality. It exists as a massive center of organized energy outside our typical dimensions of space and time, but can communicate through the subconscious as a distinct, personified voice. Whether the material was generated by parapsychological retrieval or extreme hypercreativity, this tier forces science to consider mechanisms operating far beyond normal cognitive models. With the mundane and pathological theories discarded, the investigation isolates the only remaining viable hypotheses. The first is the literal explanation claimed by the text itself. Seth exists genuinely as an independent, non-physical entity utilizing Roberts as a biological transmitter. The second, equally radical explanation is that Seth is an entirely internally generated construct of Jane Roberts' own psyche. This reveals a core limitation of the documentary approach. Analyzing informational content alone cannot definitively prove the independent external survival of a consciousness. The methodology demands a binary conclusion. Seth is either an independent entity transmitting from outside our physical reality or an extreme, unmapped production of human biology. Regardless of which binary option is true, the 21-year dataset is undeniable, and its existence forces a direct confrontation with the current limits of scientific understanding. If the Seth material was generated entirely within Jane Roberts' own mind, the scientific stakes are profound. It means the traditional clinical model of the subconscious must expand its borders to connect with a vast non-local network of information to account for the sustained rigor of this dataset. In this expanded model, the cognitive unconscious must possess an innate capacity for highly organized, rational, and ethical creation across multiple academic disciplines, operating entirely outside the primary ego's awareness. This directly contradicts the older Freudian view, which positioned the subconscious primarily as a chaotic repository of repressed trauma, instinct, and base biological drives. The Jane Roberts archive remains a meticulously documented stress test of human potential. The transpossession dataset proves that whether we are connecting to external realities or diving into our own minds, human personality possesses a vastly wider awareness than clinical science currently supposes.